Imagine losing 38 years of your life for a murder you didn't commit. Peter Sullivan entered prison in 1987 as a 30-year-old man. He walked out in 2025, aged 68, with his name cleared, but his life shattered. The evidence that destroyed him. A bite mark and a confession he swore was coerced. The truth, DNA, would later prove he wasn't even at the scene. This isn't just a legal failure. It's one of the most haunting miscarriages of justice in UK history.
Welcome to Dark Chronicles, where shadows hide the truth.
The year was 1987. The town of Bebington in Merseyside, England, was rattled by a brutal and senseless crime, the murder of 21-year-old Diane Synindal. Her body was discovered in her small flat, beaten, strangled, and with visible injuries that painted a picture of rage. The public was horrified. The press swarmed, and police, under immense pressure, vowed to find the killer quickly. Enter Peter Sullivan, a quiet, unassuming man in his early 30s. He had a criminal record, minor offenses, petty theft, drunken behavior, but nothing violent. Still, he lived near Diane. He was known to her in passing, and that was enough. Within days, he became the prime suspect. Police claimed he had confessed during a long and intense interrogation. No lawyer, no audio recordings, just a written statement that Sullivan immediately retracted, claiming he'd been manipulated and threatened into signing it. But in a time before widespread public scrutiny of interrogation practices, his plea fell on deaf ears. Then came the so-called silver bullet bite mark evidence. A forensic odontologist and expert in teeth impressions testified that a mark on Diane's shoulder matched Peter Sullivan's dental profile. That testimony, combined with his coerced confession, was enough for a jury. In less than a week, they found him guilty. Life imprisonment. Case closed. But even in the courtroom, something felt off. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no motive. Sullivan wept as the verdict was read. "I didn't kill her," he said one last time. Few believed him. Inside Wakefield Prison, time stopped. Peter Sullivan began what he thought would be the rest of his life behind bars. He refused to take part in prison programs that required accepting guilt. This hurt his chances at parole. He refused to lie, even if it meant staying inside. Over the years, the case faded from public memory. Diane's family grieved. Sullivan's family fell apart. Appeals were filed, all denied. Even when bite mark analysis began facing serious challenges and forensic science courts refused to revisit the case. The system clung to the original narrative. But science didn't stop evolving, and neither did Peter Sullivan's hope. In 2023, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, CCRC, quietly reopened his file. A new legal team presented arguments grounded not in emotion, but in cutting-edge science. They pushed for a re-examination of the evidence, specifically DNA testing on items recovered from the crime scene that had been stored in archives for decades. What they found changed everything. The samples were fragile. Time had degraded them, but not completely. Scientists used next-generation DNA sequencing, a method far beyond anything available in the 1980s. On Diane Synindal's clothing, specifically on her inner garments, and beneath her fingernails, they found DNA. Not just partial traces, but enough to build a full male profile. That profile didn't belong to Peter Sullivan. Not even close. When run against the UK's national DNA database, the result was chilling no match. The man responsible for Diane's murder was still out there, his identity unknown. But what couldn't be disputed anymore, what the data screamed, was that Peter Sullivan had nothing to do with the crime. Statistical analysis confirmed the DNA belonged to a single male source and that it was 1 billion times more likely to come from this unidentified man than from Peter Sullivan. In the world of forensic science, that number isn't just compelling, it's definitive. The legal machine had no choice but to wake up. When the evidence reached the Court of Appeal in early 2025, the tone was different. Judges who had once rubber-stamped denials were now asking hard questions. How did this man end up in prison with no physical evidence? Why had bite mark testimony, already controversial at the time, been allowed to carry so much weight? And how had the justice system allowed nearly 4 decades to pass, while an innocent man with no access to powerful lawyers screamed for someone to listen? On a rainy morning in April 2025, Peter Sullivan appeared via video link from HMP Wakefield. His hair was gray, his shoulders hunched, his eyes sunken but still defiant. As Lord Justice Hayloyd read the ruling aloud, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. In light of the new DNA evidence, he said this court finds the conviction of Mr. Peter Sullivan to be unsafe. The conviction is hereby quashed. Just like that, 38 years of institutional failure unraveled in one sentence. Sullivan's face didn't show elation. He didn't smile. He simply closed his eyes as if trying to process that his nightmare was finally officially over. Outside, journalists were already preparing their headlines. Peter Sullivan free after 38 years. Murder conviction overturned by DNA. Justice 38 years too late. But for Sullivan, the world had changed too much. His parents had died. His siblings moved on. The life he might have had career family peace was gone. Stolen by the system that once claimed to protect the innocent. And for Diane Synindal's family, the revelation reopened old wounds. They had believed for decades that the right man had been punished. Now they faced an unbearable truth: the real killer had never been caught. He could be anywhere. He could be watching the news. The public was reeling. Not just because Peter Sullivan was innocent, but because it was now clear that the system had ignored every red flag for decades. One of the biggest shocks came not from the DNA, but from what it revealed about the original investigation. In the aftermath of Sullivan's release, a confidential report from the Independent Office for Police Conduct, IOPC, was leaked. It outlined disturbing patterns in the Merseyside Police's handling of the case. According to the report, officers were under extreme pressure to secure a conviction, facing a furious public and a media frenzy after Diane's murder. Sullivan, living nearby with prior arrests, became the perfect target. Worse yet, the report detailed how alternative suspects had been ignored, including one man who had a history of violence against women and had worked in the area where Diane was killed. He had no alibi. Yet, he was dismissed early on due to a lack of sufficient cause. No forensic samples were collected from him. His name never made it to court. Even more chilling, Peter Sullivan's confession. The centerpiece of the prosecution was taken after nearly 20 hours of non-stop interrogation with no solicitor present and was not recorded on audio or video. His legal aid attorney would later testify that he had never even reviewed the confession before trial. In '93, the American Academy of Forensic Sciences had already begun warning about the unreliability of bite mark analysis. By 2004, the method had been discredited by numerous studies. Yet, UK courts continued to uphold Sullivan's conviction, based in part on that single piece of junk science. Why? Some say it was institutional pride. Others blame political pressure. But the result was the same: Peter Sullivan's truth was silenced, while the myth of his guilt was repeated over and over by tabloids, by prosecutors, by judges. It wasn't until 2023, when the CCRC launched its reinvestigation, that the tide finally turned. But even then, it wasn't automatic. Sullivan's previous 2 appeals had been denied. His 2011 request for DNA testing had been ignored. Only after public pressure from wrongful conviction advocates and a shift in leadership within the CCRC did his case make it back into court. In a twist that still stuns legal observers, one of the forensic experts who testified against Sullivan in 1987 publicly apologized in 2025. Dr. Robert Fielding, now retired, said, "We were wrong. I believed I was helping deliver justice. I now realize I helped destroy an innocent man's life. And still, the man known as Unknown Male 1 remains a ghost. His DNA profile sits in databases across Europe. No hits, no arrests. But he was there, on Diane's body, under her fingernails. A silent witness to a crime still crying for resolution. Peter Sullivan's name has been cleared, but the case far from over. Peter Sullivan walked out of HMP Wakefield after 38 years with no fanfare, no compensation, no apology from the system that stole his youth, his dignity, and almost his identity. In the eyes of the law, he was now an innocent man. But what do you say to someone who lost 4 decades to a lie? A camera caught him leaving the prison gates. He didn't speak. He just stood there, breathing the outside air like it was unfamiliar. Around him, the world had changed: cars, phones, cities, even justice itself. But inside him, time had frozen on one unshakable truth: he never did it. The UK government has yet to confirm whether Sullivan will receive compensation. According to legal precedent, he may be entitled, but it's not automatic. He'll need to file a civil claim, submit to another legal process, and possibly fight again, this time for reparations instead of freedom. Meanwhile, the murder of Diane Synindal is now officially an open and active investigation. The National Crime Agency, NCA, and Merseyside Police are reprocessing all physical evidence from the original crime scene. Over 260 men have been voluntarily DNA tested. The real killer, the man behind the DNA known as Unknown Male 1, remains unidentified. His profile sits in the UK's database and Interpol's system, waiting for a match. But there's another truth here, one deeper, more unsettling. Peter Sullivan's case wasn't a rare glitch, it was a symptom. A system that resists admitting error, a science that was trusted too long, a courtroom that values conviction over accuracy, and a man forgotten by society who had to wait until the very fabric of forensic science changed to get a second chance. Today, Peter Sullivan is free, but he carries a life that never happened. Diane Synindal's family now mourns not just her death, but the realization that for 38 years they were grieving with the wrong man behind bars. And we viewers, citizens, believers in justice are left with questions that don't go away so easily. How many more Peter Sullivans are still inside? How many more families think they have justice when all they have is a story built on sand? This is not just a case, it's a mirror, and the reflection it gives back is not comfortable.